For those of you that don't know who I am, Andrew Volkert, Precision Ag Consultant for Region 5. Basically all the stores in Iowa. We got 5 stores in Iowa. Work with all of them, working with customers in their Ops Center account, data management, making sure stuff's set up, data's flowing. Also work a lot with just salesmen and technicians, making sure they're understanding the new technologies and kind of what's coming down the pipeline. So in this session, what we're going to touch base on, implement guidance, AutoPath, and ATTA. So first one here, what is implement guidance? For those of you that haven't heard of implement guidance before, we do have 2 different options. We have active implement guidance and passive implement guidance. Kind of what I'm going to focus mainly on today is passive implement guidance. So looking at the picture here, what implement guidance is where we can actually put a implement receiver on our implement, and then that implement is actually going to basically tell the tractor to go left or right, so we keep that implement right on our guidance line. So as we think about it, if we're in the hills or maybe going around curves, obviously our tractor normally stays on our AutoTrac line, but our implement could drift left or right a little bit. While putting that implement receiver on here, it's actually going to offset the tractor, and our planter or whatever implement we have should stay right on the line. So again, we have to have that receiver on our implement. We also use shared signal as well, and we'll touch on that here in a little bit. So what is required to do implement guidance? Obviously, we have to have that receiver on that implement. We do have to be running a Gen 4 or a G5 display. And on that Gen 4, we just need to double check, make sure that is a version 2. So when those Gen 4s first started coming out in the tractors, they had a version 1. A lot of those have been updated to version 2, so you do have to have a version 2 Gen 4, 4640, or any of the Gen 5 displays. And we need to double check, make sure that we do have current software on that. The tech world that we live in, software is very important. If anybody is having any issues out there, the number one thing we're going to say, well, is your software up to date? So along with the displays, we need to have either Automation 4.0 or an advanced license. So on our Gen 4s, it's going to be called that Automation 4.0. On your 4600 command centers, that's a one-time activation. If you are running a 4640, that's going to be that yearly cost. And then on the Gen 5s, we do have that advanced license now. For those universals, that's $750. So you have to have the Automation 4.0 advanced license, and then we also have to run SF3 or greater signal. So SF3 or RTK. Now when we say that, we want to make sure we have that SF3 or RTK on the tractor. So we want our greater signal on the tractor, and then on our implement, we can just have a 6000 with SF1 is fine to have that on that implement, because it's going to share that signal back. So just remember, greater signal is on the tractor. And again, we can use this on third-party implements. Granted, hopefully everybody is running Deere, but I understand that's not always the case. I run into some guys they have a Deere planter, but they're running precision on it. We can still set up implement guidance on that. I even have a few guys with Kinseys running the new Blue Vantage, and we are running implement guidance with them as well. So obviously, if we got to set up one of those third parties, there's some extra cost in harnessing and get that set up, but just know that that is capable of doing. So that's implement guidance, and kind of the next step to all of this is then being able to do AutoPath. So what AutoPath is, you see there is automatically creating guidance lines from row crop data. So as we're out there planting, you see the image here, like we're actually creating guidance lines where all those rows are. So we create those guidance lines in our planter pass, and then we're able to move those guidance lines into our sprayer, into our combine to use later on that season. So for example, the sprayer, if somebody's running a Hagee doing some high clearance corn, putting some fungicide on, they can use those AutoPath lines, run right down the row. And then also combining, an example we always use is that if you get some down corn, obviously the row sense, your feelers aren't going to be working very well, but with these AutoPath lines, that display, that combine is going to know exactly where everything was planted, should be able to run right down those rows. So you can see here, some guys, if they strip till in the fall, we can move those lines into the planting tractor, plant right on top of those strip till lines, create new lines, move them to the sprayer, and move them to the combine and use all season long. Just some requirements here. It's John Deere exclusive, obviously. We can't run AutoPath and any other type of equipment. You do have to have Operations Center to use our AutoPath lines. So as we gather those lines in the display, they have to flow into op center, and then you push those lines back out of op center to do your second and third passes. And then I got here same correction level on all operations. So if we strip till last fall with SF3, you're going to want to run SF3 in planting. Ideally, like if you're going to do it in the fall and then all spring, you're going to want to run RTK. So RTK last fall, RTK this spring, basically RTK throughout the whole year. Now we're going to, if you're thinking about switching to SF RTK at some point, you're going to probably want to do that like at a season changeover. So if you're thinking about going SF RTK and you already recorded lines last fall with radio RTK, run those radio RTKs this year, and then before you strip till next fall, that's when you would want to switch to SF RTK. So throughout that whole season, you want to stay on that same correction level. And then also that the second pass must be with integrated AutoTrac. I have heard of a few guys wanting to try it with like an ATU and a sprayer, but you do have to have your integrated AutoTrac to use those lines. And so here's kind of like just a kind of a snapshot of kind of what that looks like with your guidance lines in that field. So one of the, I would say bad things, or one thing we need to work on, is that it's like in the display, if you're recording your AutoPath lines, it doesn't really paint that for you. You don't really know if it's working or not. So I think last year with one of the software updates, we were able to add this AutoPath recording status right here. So if you don't have that showing up on your plant and tractor, we go up to your advanced settings, and then we're able to enable AutoPath recording status, and then that's where we get this to show up. So I highly recommend if you're going to record lines to get that showed up, because right now it says not ready to record. That means we got something going on. We're not going to be recording. Okay. So that gives us this checklist. Okay. So we got 4 checks we need to get, and then this warning down here at the bottom. So we got implement receiver must be set up in profile, row information must be defined, implement receiver must be present, and accuracy must be SF3 or higher. So for that, the implement receiver must be set up in the profile. So obviously if we have our planner created, we scroll all the way down to the bottom and we have an implement receiver that we can add in there. And then here we got 2 different measurements. We got a GPS lateral offset. So depending if that globe is right in the middle of the planner or off to one side, we got to get that measurement in there, as well as our GPS inline offset. So I typically always carry a plumb bob with me, drop that down from that receiver to get those measurements and get them put in here. Very, very, very important to get accurate measurements in here. So that next one was talking about your rows defined. If you have a Seed Star planner, it's going to automatically populate that. You should be fine. But if you're putting it on a third-party planner, a Kinsey planner, something like that, when you set that implement up, you want to make sure to come in here and select your rows and get your correct rows and spacing. If you would just do a total width with one row, obviously it's not going to record correctly. So that was going back up. So that was these 2. So if we're green, or all check marks here, it's going to say ready to record, but we have this verify implement fore and aft and height to do. So, and that's actually on our, basically on our receiver screen. So with that second receiver in there, we go into our VT screen, we're going to see 2 receivers. One's going to say machine, and then we're going to have another one that says implement. So another thing we need to check is this fore and aft and the height on that implement receiver in here. So that's very, very important. I ran into it a few times last year. Guys didn't put that in, and they were getting wides and narrows on their guest row and wanted to know why. You want it at operating height. So that's when you do all your measurements at operating height. So your fore and aft is from your center of rotation on the planner, and then obviously height is just from the ground up. So we want to get these correct. And then the last thing we want to do is do an advanced TCM calibration. Okay. So if you haven't heard of this, so we have our normal TCM calibration. We get on level ground, mark that back axle, do a 180, mark that back axle again. That's kind of like just a single point calibration. What this advanced TCM calibration is, so you have to have a 6,000 or up to do it, also a Gen 4 or up to do it. But what it does, when it walks you through this process, basically it sets an AutoTrac line for you. And again, when you're doing this calibration, you want that planner in the ground at operating height. You're going to AutoTrac that line down, pick up, turn around, AutoTrac that line back. So what we're doing is since we're going on that same AutoTrac line, we're getting multiple points of calibration. So instead of that single point, we get a multiple point. So highly, highly recommend doing this, especially if you're doing implement guidance AutoPath. And again, so menu, applications, and then there's an actual Starfire icon, and then in there is where you'll be able to see that advanced TCM calibration. Last one I wanted to touch on here quick is just AutoTrac turn automation. Basically with this, automatically turn the machine on the headlands. Today we're capable of doing it in tractors and combines. It's been around in tractors for a while. Combines last fall it just came out, if anybody got a chance to try that. On the tractor side, you do have to have tractor implement automation on that tractor, which that's a free one-time activation that gets put on. And then again, in order to do this, you have to have your Automation 4.0 or your G5 Advanced license. And then when we are doing our turn automation, basically we have to be using an AutoPath lines or a straight track to do that. And another thing that is required is you have to have boundaries to do this. In our next section, Chris is going to talk a little bit more on the boundary side of things. So as far as like our display setup with our turn automation, I know when you kind of first look at this, there's a lot going on, but honestly, it's not too bad. We go into our menu, applications, AutoTrac turn automation, just some settings here. So like the aggressiveness of our turn. If we're going to have more of a light bulb turn or more of a tighter U-turn, we can dictate that. You know, from our headland boundary, when are we going to start our turn? We can set a max speed and an infield speed. And then also we have some settings here for, okay, when we are coming into our headland and exiting our headland, you know, what sequences do we want to do? So, you know, do we want to, you know, disengage our front wheel assist? When do we want to pick up the planter? When do we want to set the planter down? Basically, we get all of this set up. So as we get going in that field, it's essentially hands-free. Now we see here speed control on and off. So when it came out with the combines, when you were combining, you still had to control your speed and then also control your header height and everything. Basically, it just did the turn for you. Now that's an option with the tractors as well. If you wanted your speed control off, basically your speed's gonna gray out and then you're gonna control your speed through that turn.